Looking for magic cards? At flipsidegaming.com you can now use the promo code LVD to get a 10% discount on orders over $10, and starting from now you also get entered into the Guilds of Ravnica booster box giveaway, which runs until October 5th. Hello and welcome to another episode of Spike Sunday, a weekly series where we take a look at established, standard or modern decks, and this week we're taking a look at Hardened Scales in Modern, an artifact-based creature combo deck, you could describe it, that has a lot of +1/+1 counter synergies built in, and one of the key cards in the deck is the namesake Hardened Scales, a 1-mana green enchantment that says if one or more +1/+1 counters would be put on a creature you control, you can put an additional +1/+1 counter on that creature instead, and almost every creature in the deck has some sort of +1/+1 counter synergy, so having a turn 1 Hardened Scales in this deck makes a very big difference. So let's take a look at the entire deck list, starting out with the 0-mana artifacts, where we have the full 4 copies of Mox Opal, and we've got a ton of artifacts in this deck, so it's very trivial to turn on Metalcraft, and at that point Mox Opal taps for 1 mana of any color, which is a very powerful effect, letting us ramp out our stuff ahead of curve. And then we have 3 copies of Welding Jar, which is another cheap artifact that helps us turn on Metalcraft for Mox Opal, and when we sacrifice Welding Jar we can regenerate target artifact, so it helps protect our creatures from opposing removal spells. Then moving on to our 1-drops, we've already covered the 4 copies of Hardened Scales. Then we also have 5 1-mana artifact creatures. We've got 4 copies of Arcbound Worker, which is a 1-mana 0/0 artifact creature, but it has modular 1, so it enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it, and when it dies we get to move that +1/+1 counter onto another target artifact creature we control. And then we also have a copy of Sparring Construct, which is kind of the worst version of Arcbound Worker in that it's a 1-mana 1/1, and when the Sparring Construct dies we can put a +1/+1 counter on target creature we control. The small upside of Sparring Construct is that when it dies it can put the +1/+1 counter on any creature, doesn't have to be an artifact creature specifically, but in our deck that doesn't matter, and Arcbound Worker has more synergies with Hardened Scales, since if we play Arcbound Worker with a Hardened Scales in play, it will enter the battlefield with an additional +1/+1 counter for each copy of Hardened Scales that we have in play. Then we have 4 copies of Ancient Stirrings, which is one of the key cards in all the colorless decks in Modern, and it's no exception here, letting us take a look at the top 5 cards and reveal a colorless card to put into our hand, so it can both find us lands, but also all the artifacts in the deck are fair game. And then we also have 1 copy of Animation Module, which is a pretty interesting artifact. So whenever 1 or more +1/+1 counters are put on a permanent we control, we can pay 1 generic mana, and if we do we get to make a 1/1 colorless servo artifact creature token, and for 3 mana and tapping the Animation Module, we can choose a counter on target permanent or player, and then give that permanent or player another counter of that kind. So it works very nicely with all our +1/+1 counter synergies, lets us create a lot of servo tokens with all our spare mana, and then we can sacrifice those spare servo tokens to all sorts of effects like Throne of Geth or Arcbound Ravager, so it has a lot of built-in synergy there as well. And the ability to put extra counters on stuff is not only very useful with +1/+1 counter synergies, but we're also playing with infect creatures, since we have 4 copies of Inkmoth Nexus, which puts poison counters on players, so we can also increase the number of poison counters on a player by activating Animation Module, which could come up. Then moving on to our 2-drops, we have the full 4 copies of Steel Overseer, a staple in Affinity decks and in Hardened Scales alike. 2 mana for a 1/1 artifact creature that we can tap to put a +1/+1 counter on each artifact creature we control. So a very powerful effect if we can untap with the Overseer, especially if we have a Hardened Scales in play. Then we also have the full 4 copies of Arcbound Ravager, 2 mana for a 0/0 creature that has a modular 1, so the same as Arcbound Worker, but we can also sacrifice an artifact to put a +1/+1 counter on Arcbound Ravager. And cards like Animation Module let us generate a lot of artifacts that we can sacrifice. Cards like Hangarback Walker also generate a lot of artifacts, so there's a lot of food for the Arcbound Ravager to eat up. And of course with Hardened Scales in play, getting an additional +1/+1 counter on the Ravager can get out of hand very quickly. And of course the modular ability on the Ravager means that if we sacrifice Ravager to itself, we can still move all those +1/+1 counters from the Ravager onto something else, for instance a Walking Ballista to maybe just shoot down the opponent, but we'll get to that in a second. Then we also have a copy of Evolutionary Leap, which is an enchantment that lets us sacrifice our creatures for 1 green mana, and then we get to reveal cards over the top of our library until we reveal a creature card that we can then put into our hand. So it helps us sacrifice our smaller creatures or our tokens and then find more useful creatures in the process, and also very powerful against removal heavy decks, since if they try to kill our creatures and we have green mana up, we can just sacrifice our creatures in response and find a replacement. And then we also have 2 copies of Throne of Geth, which is a 2-mana artifact that we can tap and then sacrifice an artifact in order to proliferate. So it's very similar to Animation Module, but instead of just choosing one player or permanent, we can choose any number of players and or permanents. So scales very nicely the more +1/+1 counter creatures we have in play. And finally, we get to our double X casting cost artifacts, where we have 4 Walking Ballistas and 4 Hangarback Walkers. So they enter the battlefield with a number of +1/+1 counters equal to the cost of X. So if X equals 1, the total converted mana cost is 2, and Hangarback Walker enters the battlefield with 1 +1/+1 counter on it. So 2 mana is 1 counter, 4 mana is 2 counters, and so forth. And of course, they scale very nicely with the number of Hardened Scales we have in play and the other +1/+1 counter synergies. And then in the case of Hangarback, we can pay 1 mana and tap the Hangarback to put an additional +1/+1 counter on it. And when the Hangarback dies, we get a number of Thopter tokens with flying equal to the number of +1/+1 counters on the Hangarback when it died. So it makes for some great synergies with the Arcbound Ravager, since if we have a big Hangarback, we sacrifice it, we get a whole number of Thopter tokens, which we can then sacrifice again to the Arcbound Ravager and make the Ravager huge, and then maybe move all those counters onto a Walking Ballista, which is our last creature here. So much like Hangarback Walker enters the battlefield with a number of +1/+1 counters on it, and here we can pay 4 mana to put an additional +1/+1 counter on the Walking Ballista, and we can remove a +1/+1 counter from the Ballista to deal 1 damage to any target. So this is our main removal spell in the deck, if you will, and can also be used to just kill the opponent on the spot if we can accumulate enough +1/+1 counters to put onto our Walking Ballista through Arcbound Ravager or other means. Then taking a look at our mana base, we've got a total of 20 lands. Of course, we also have 4 copies of Mox Opal, which produces mana. So we've got 11 colorless lands and 9 green producing lands. So alongside 4 Mox Opals, we've got 13 green sources. So we've got 4 copies of a Darksteel Citadel, which counts as an artifact. So we can also sacrifice it to Arcbound Ravager, for example, and counts as an artifact for Mox Opal for Metalcraft. Then we've got 4 copies of Inkmoth Nexus, which can turn into a flying Blinkmoth creature with Infect, so if it deals 10 poison damage to the opponent, we win the game. And loading a bunch of Arcbound Ravager counters onto an Inkmoth Nexus is also an easy way to win the game. And then we've got 2 copies of Blinkmoth Nexus, which turns into a regular flying Blinkmoth creature and can also be used to give a Blinkmoth +1/+1 until end of turn. So it can even be used on defense on itself. So let's say the opponent attacks you with a 1/1 flyer, then you can animate Blinkmoth Nexus, block, and then use the ability on itself, making it into a 2/2 flyer and take down a 1/1 flyer without dying. And of course you can use it to pump up your Inkmoth Nexus as well. And we also have a 1 Phyrexia score, which we can use to sacrifice an artifact to gain 1 life. So the life gain can be useful against aggressive decks, and can also be used as a sacrifice outlet if we don't have one in play already, to maybe sacrifice a Hangarback Walker to get a whole bunch of Thopter tokens going. And then at the green producing lands, we've got a total of 6 basic forests, and then we've got 2 Horizon Canopies, which we can sacrifice to draw a card if we're flooding out a bit, and 1 Pendelhaven, which we can use to give a 1/1 creature +1/+2 until end of turn, which can also be useful especially in combination with Inkmoth Nexus. Then going over the sideboard, we've got 1 copy of Gutshot if we need removal for 1 toughness creatures, 4 copies of Nature's Claim to destroy artifacts and enchantments, very useful against hate cards like Stony Silence. We've got 1 Grafdigger's Cage against graveyard decks and 2 Relic of Progenitus, then 4 Damping Sphere against Tron decks and other combo decks like Storm, 2 copies of Dismember, similar to Gutshot but can deal with larger creatures, and then 1 copy of Karn, Scion of Urza, which can also be a powerful win condition in the more grindy games. So that's the deck. Now let's jump into some games and see how the deck does. Alright, we're on the draw, and this hand seems great. We've got the Hardened Scales, we've got the Ancient Stirrings to find action or opponent on Tron, so that's going to be a tough matchup for sure. It's all about getting on the board quickly and trying to kill our opponent before they get down an Ulamog. Opponent with their own Ancient Stirrings finds Ulamog. Alright, speak of the devil. Alright, so how do we want to proceed? Could just play a Ravager, could spend time digging with Ancient Stirrings, but I'm not sure what we're looking for. So I think playing a Ravager's okay here. Alright, our opponent's on the white version of Tron, featuring Path to Exiles. Let's play this Welding Jar, see what happens. Alright, so we can probably afford 2 Ancient Stirrings and find Ravager, Hangarback, Overseer. So the Hangarback goes well with the Ravager and the Ballista, since we can kind of accumulate a whole bunch of counters and shoot the opponent with a giant Ballista. Overseer is the card that can provide a ton of value over time as well, but we're not exactly going wide. And I don't think we need a second Ravager, so I think I'll go with the Hangarback. Plus we also have Throne of Geth as a sacrifice outlet in case the Ravager dies. So we'll attack for 2. And play Hangarback. And say go. And we'll have to do some math next turn to figure out if we are making a big enough ballista to deal some serious damage. Our opponent did assemble Tron, so they've got 8 mana now. So next turn we might be facing Ulamog, and it's going to be a World Breaker, and it's going to go after the Ravager. Alright, so that's going to make it so it's going to be difficult to completely go off with Ballista next turn, but we can just sacrifice the Welding Jar, put 2 counters on it, and then put all the counters on the Hangarback. So we've got a 7-powered Hangarback. Opponent's got a World Breaker. Alright, so probably time to attack with the Hangarback here. I guess we can Ancient Stirrings first. And what do we find? More Hangarbacks and Inkmoth. Steel Overseer, Welding Jar. So what's our plan? We're gonna attack with the Walker, and we probably want to play Throne of Geth, so if our opponent tries to mess with our Walker we can sacrifice it in response. So what goes best with that plan? I'm guessing just a land or the Mox Opal is fine, since that gives us an extra land to play a bigger Ballista next turn. And try to burn out our opponent that way. Don't think we have time for Overseer. And I don't think we need a second Hangarback. So I'll take the Inkmoth. And attack for 7. Opponent takes it. And then we'll play the Throne of Geth. And say go. Alright, so if our opponent tries to exile the Hangarback with an Ulamog, we can sacrifice it in response and try to kill our opponent with a bunch of Flying Thopters. Alright, they're going for Inkmoth and Hardened Scales. I guess we can let that happen. So our opponent's got an Ulamog, and Breaker gets in there, that's fine. We might have to keep a Thopter back, but we would rather block Ulamog than the World Breaker. So end of turn we're gonna sag the Hangarback, make some Thopters, and nothing to proliferate. Ooh, and Hardened Scales a draw. So can we kill our opponent now? We can play Hardened Scales, play a Ballista, which will get 2 counters. And if we proliferate, it's gonna be 4, and 4 plus 7 is lethal. So unless our opponent's got a Path to Exile in hand, this would do it. Although it is risky if they do have the path, but I guess we don't have to go for it quite yet. We can kind of wait until the opponent makes a move. We could wait for the opponent to attack, and then we can block with the Ballista. I guess that's our plan here. So we'll say go. We'll let the opponent attack with Ulamog, we'll block with the Walking Ballista on Ulamog, and then we try and proliferate. And if they don't have path, they're dead. If they do have path, then there are 2, but we block the Ulamog. And if they path preemptively, then they're dead, since we can activate Throne of Geth, proliferate, and deal 4 to them. Oblivion Stone to draw, don't think that changes much. And our opponent tapped their white mana, so the only removal spell I can think of that they commonly play is Dismember, which at 4 life doesn't do anything, so we'll sacrifice a Thopter, proliferate, putting 2 extra counters thanks to Hardened Scales, and that's 4 damage. And our opponent scoops it up, awesome, so we managed to steal game 1 from Tron with the timely top-decked Hardened Scales there. Alright, so this is where 4 Damping Spheres come in. Question is how many Nature's Claims do we want? And then which cards don't we like? When in doubt, got a Sparring Construct. I don't think this matchup is about grindy card advantage, so Leap can go. Animation Module also feels a bit too slow to me. Maybe Welding Jar can get cut, at least 1. It is useful against cards like Oblivion Stone, but it's pretty narrow. And I guess we want to bring in Nature's Claim, mostly to kill Expedition Map on turn 1. So I guess we're cutting the Welding Jars completely. I guess Steel Overseer could also be too slow on the draw. So I guess we'll try something like this, but I'm not 100% sure that we need all 4 Nature's Claims. Alright, so we don't have a Damping Sphere. Do we have a reasonable draw otherwise? So this hand's okay, but it's not particularly explosive. Doesn't have a Hardened Scales in it. And with our opponent mulliganing to 6, I think I'm willing to do the same. Alright, well, this hand's not great. It's probably worse than our previous one by quite a bit. But we do have a Nature's Claim to interact, and I think being able to interact against Tron is pretty important, so I'll give this one a shot. And I'll keep an Ancient Stirrings. And we're gonna destroy that map as soon as we can. Alright, so we might have slowed down the opponent assembling Tron, which is good. But we're not particularly fast ourselves. Alright, opponent with 2 Tron pieces and a sphere, so that's making me nervous, and an expedition map. Well, at least they only have 1 card in hand, so they might be missing the payoff card. So we can Stirrings and play Worker. I guess that's better than playing Ballista for 1. And what do we find? Hangarback, Citadel, Canopy, Inkmoth. Don't have a Ravager, so Inkmoth is not looking super appealing. Do we just want the Hangarback? I guess so. Don't think we need more lands. And Hangarback is a nice combo with our Throne of Geth. And then we'll play the Worker. Alright, so our opponent's got Tron, despite the mulligan and the Nature's Claim. We'll see what they do with it. Would have been nice to find a Damping Sphere with the Ancient Stirrings as well. They're gonna sack the Sphere for an Ancient Stirrings. And that's probably gonna find them a finisher. And Karn Liberated is gonna do the trick. Alright, it's too bad. I guess Tron doing what Tron does. At least drawing the Ravager was definitely a good draw here. So we've got the 3 creatures we need, but we don't have the Hardened Scales. So what's our play here? I guess we're playing a Hangarback and then activating Pendelhaven. Alright, we'll see what the opponent does here with 9 mana. It's gonna be a Karn. And they're gonna minus on the Hangarback. Fair enough. Alright, found another Ravager. So we probably just wanna kill Karn here. So we can activate Pendelhaven, sack Ravager to itself, put the counter on the Worker, finish off Karn. I think that's probably the way to go. Alright, at least we got to deal with Karn, which is a big deal. That cost us a Ravager and a Hangarback. And no finisher yet for the opponents, and Damping Sphere. Alright, that's a timely draw. And I think we're playing that right away, since we can't afford to let our opponent untap and top deck something. But our opponent does have 5 lands in play, so they're not too far off from just hardcasting something powerful. But I think it's still the right play here to play the Sphere. Too many ways things could go wrong if we let them untap. They might have a World Breaker that was stuck in their hands and that they weren't able to play last turn. Alright, there's a Stirrings. Reveals another Karn Liberated. And yeah, opponent could just cast it next turn. So we can only do one thing here because of our own Damping Sphere, and I think we're probably better off playing Ballista for 2. As that can also help us burn out a Karn after it minuses. And it's going to be 6 mana for a Wormcoil Engine. Alright, it's also bad news, but we can kind of prevent the life gain by sacking our creature with a Ravager after blockers. So we do have some game against it. And this Inkmoth Nexus doesn't care about the opponent gaining life. But of course, knowing their opponent has a Karn in hand, going all in on Inkmoth Nexus over a couple of turns doesn't seem worth it. Would love to get the Steel Overseer into play, but I'm thinking we're better off playing the Ravager, preventing the life gain from the Wormcoil Engine, and then we may or may not put the counters on the Inkmoth Nexus. Alright, so we'll see what our opponent does here. They did find a land, so they do have access to Karn. Instead it's going to be a World Breaker. So they still have a Karn in hand. World Breaker is going to deal with Damping Sphere. Interesting. Didn't think they cared too much about the Damping Sphere at this point, but I guess I'll take it. So we'll sack it to the Ravager, put a counter on it. I guess a World Breaker also just blocks the Inkmoth, so that plan might not work out now. Alright, Wormcoil attacks. Do we care about taking 6? My guess is we just block with the Arcbound Ravager here and then sack it to the Ravager itself. And put all the counters on the Ravager. So we've got a 5/5 Ravager, and I think we just untap here. So now that Damping Sphere is gone, we can play both our 2-drops, and we even picked up a Hardened Scales, which is pretty exciting here. Alright, so what's our plan? We can play Hardened Scales, can play a Throne of Geth, which can sacrifice an artifact to proliferate. Opponent's going to be forced to block our Walking Ballista here. So let's play Throne of Geth. And I think we just attack with both. And then see how they block. Alright, our opponent didn't block. So I think it's time to go for it here. Activate Inkmoth Nexus. Sack Inkmoth to the Ravager. Sack Throne of Geth to itself to proliferate. Proliferate both our creatures. And then we can let damage happen. Opponent takes 13. And then we can sack Ravager to itself. Put all the counters on Ballista. And then shoot the opponent for the last 5 points. So definitely possible that we would not have won had our opponent blocked our Walking Ballista with the World Breaker. But they didn't, so I'll take it. On to the next one. Alright, we're on a draw, and this seems like a very powerful hand. Won't be able to cast Hardened Scales on turn 1 most likely, but I guess now we can. And up against blue-red, could be Storm, could be some control deck. Alright, so this is kind of the dream start. And our opponent has their own Darksteel Citadel, interesting. And a Mind Stone, so could be some version of KCI. That's playing Spar Bluff, maybe for Psy. My guess is we just get the Hardened Scales down. And then we'll have more information on what to choose with the Ancient Stirrings. And next turn. Attack for 1. And if we get to untap with our Steel Overseer, then good things are gonna happen. Could also consider animating the Blinkmoth Nexus and then activating Overseer. It's definitely possible. Although I guess what I didn't consider is the implications of Engineered Explosives. Since if we are up against some sort of KCI deck, then playing both copies of Hardened Scales might not have been the best idea. So yeah, we probably should have just cast the Stirrings instead there. But turns out our opponent might not be on a KCI deck after all. Lightning Greaves. Hangarback, not a bad draw, but we can probably afford to Stirrings first. Some lands and Module. We'll take Module. Play a Hangarback for 1. And then I think we want to activate the Blinkmoth here. So before damage, we'll activate Blinkmoth using itself, and then activate Steel Overseer. And make a bunch of counters. Alright, so not sure what these Greaves are going to equip. The opponent is playing with Ichor Wellspring, so could be KCI after all. Second Wellspring. And the Welding Jar, so they've got 1 card left in hand. And we picked up a Throne of Geth, so could we kill our opponent here? Seems likely. Don't think it takes much here. Play Throne of Geth. Sacrifice a land. Proliferate everywhere. And then just attack with everyone. And I doubt they have interaction here. Alright, so up a game against a blue-red artifact deck. Not sure exactly what they're trying to do, but my guess is Nature's Claim's gonna come in. And that's about it. Welding Jar might be bad, not sure how much we need Evolutionary Leap. Sparring Construct might also be the cut here. I think we'll keep in the Leap in case it does end up being a grindy matchup. But we'll cut the Jars and the Construct, even though cutting Jar makes our Mox Opal a bit less explosive. Yeah, we'll try this. Alright, this hand is not as exciting as our first one, but I think it's still a keep. Opponent with their own Mox Opal. And we find some module, some lands, and Mox Opal. So how badly do we want a Mox Opal? Mox Opal is definitely very tempting here with the Darksteel Citadel in our hand, but I think we might be better off taking the module. Opponent with Wellspring once again, and Arcbound Worker, so we could go module plus Worker, but I think we're better off playing one of our 2 mana cards here. So either Hangarback or Ravager, leaning towards Hangarback. Gives us more options with the activation next turn. And there's Psy, which we kind of were expecting. I guess I didn't bring in the Dismembers, and if we were suspecting Psy, then bringing in Dismember makes sense. But I think we can beat Psy fair and square here, especially if we find the Hardened Scales at some point. So I'm not too concerned. So this turn we can probably go Ravager plus module. Seems reasonable. And then next turn by playing the Worker or the Ballista, or by activating the Walker, we can start making servo tokens, which is food for the Ravager. And eventually all these artifacts are going to end up on this Walking Ballista. There's a Desolate Lighthouse again. And 5 mana for Kuldotha Forgemaster. Alright, so that's part of their combo. So curious to see what that gets. Could be maybe a Blightsteel Colossus. Who knows what else. So next turn they could be activating it. We did bring in our Nature's Claim, so at least that helps against the Forgemaster. But we'll have to top deck it right away. Psy's gonna stay back. And another Worker to draw. Alright, so we could definitely be in a bit of trouble. I think for now we just play Worker. Make a token with the module. And then play a Throne of Geth. And Throne of Geth plus the servos from the animation module is also a very nice combo here. I wonder if we should activate main phase. Don't think we have to, so we'll just say go for now. Keep our options open. Alright, let's see if our opponent's gonna go for the Forgemaster activation and what they get. Alright, second Forgemaster, fair enough. And now they're activating it. Sacking some Thopters and the Wellspring is my guess. And yep, there's the Blightsteel Colossus, which does have trample, so chump blocking's not really going to be an option. So let's sack the servo, proliferate everywhere. Definitely don't want to proliferate the poison that our opponent's going to apply in a second, but proliferating some counters is fine here. And pick up another Arcbound Worker, so we want to be proliferating with the Throne of Geth as much as possible, which means we'll play Ballista for 1. And we won't be making any servos. Alright, so I should probably do the math to figure out if we can actually deal lethal here. Probably gonna do this anyway, so I might as well do it now. Let's proliferate. Alright, so now we've got this. So now if we were to sack a Worker to the Ravager, Ravager gets 1, Worker moves 2 counters to Ballista, so that's plus 3 total. So 3, 6, plus 4 is 10, plus 3 is 13. Yeah, I think we have lethal here. So let's sack Hangarback Walker, make a bunch of Thopters. I'm just gonna sack the module so it doesn't bother us anymore. Start sacking some Thopters. And our opponent could technically have interaction here with the Mox Opal, but I'm gonna assume they don't have anything. And we can kind of play around the lightning bolt effect pretty easily here. Sack another worker to the Ravager, put counters on Ballista, and so now the Ballista's already out of bolt range. And then there's 2 more artifacts to sacrifice. So we already have 20 here, but we might as well go all in. Ravager sacks itself. Puts the counter on Ballista. And now we've got a 22-22 Walking Ballista, which should be able to get the job done here. And our opponent scoops it up. Awesome. So a Throne of Geth getting it done without the help of Hardened Scales. Pretty impressive. On to the next one. Alright, we're on the draw, and this hand actually seems quite good. We've got Citadel, Opal, and Worker, which lets us play Hardened Scales turn 1 as well. Although not in the preferred order, but I'll still take it. Up against what could be a blue-white control deck, who knows. Gets basic island for an opt, so blue-white control seems likely. Alright, instead they get Steam Vents and Delver of Secrets. Alright, never mind. Opponent on a Delver deck. So let's lead with a Worker. And then attack with our original Worker. Opponent takes it. We could consider waiting until we can find Arcbound Ravager before playing the Steel Overseer, but I guess I'm fine if they kill this. We've got plenty going on already, and on the off chance that it does survive, we're gonna be in a great spot. Alright, Spell Snare instead, that's fair. I think I'm happy that it traded for Spell Snare, since most of our other 2-drops can get us a little bit of value even if the opponent kills it right away. And Delver transforms, and our opponent revealed the Burst Lightning, so we know they have at least that removal spell in hand. Let's play Ancient Stirrings and find ourselves an Arcbound Ravager. Seems good. But our opponent could have Snapcaster into Spell Snare here, so we might wanna wait on this Ravager. Difficult to say here. Let's play the Worker first. How bad is Snapcaster Snare? It's pretty annoying. But what's the alternative? Keeping Ravager in hand indefinitely? I guess we kind of waste our opponent's mana by saying go. I guess we pass a turn here, and then wait 1 turn on playing the Ravager. Alright, they have a Nimble Obstructionist instead. I think I'm okay trying to block the Obstructionist with our Inkmoth Nexus here, so we don't take too much damage in the race. Opponent is down to 10 already. They took quite a bit of damage from their own mana base. And if they want to use a Burst Lightning on the Inkmoth Nexus, that's fine by me. Let's see if we get to block. We don't, so they're going to use a Burst Lightning. That's fine. So we take 6. But now Ravager is good to go unless they have a second Spell Snare in hand. And I don't think these decks play a ton of them. Tapped Steam Vents from the opponent. Alright, time to go for it. Resolves. So we can probably kill our opponent here. I guess we can start by attacking. Maybe our opponent makes a move. My guess is we just want to put some counters on Worker so it survives Lightning Bolt, and then hope they don't have a Vapor Snag. So we'll sack the smaller one. Try to target a 2-2, which would put 2 counters on it, and then it's already out of bolt range. And if they target it with bolt, then we just sack the other one. And our opponent's going to go with the Wizard's Lightning, so that's not going to work out. Put the counters there. Let that resolve. So now a 5-5 takes 3, put 2 more counters on it. And then we can just sack the Ravager itself. Could even sack some more stuff first to deal even more damage, but it's not necessary here. Alright, So we got the game 1 against Blue-Red Wizards. Let's take a look at our sideboard. So Gutshot is an option. Dismember is an option. I don't think we want Karn. Nature's Claim to gain 4 life, destroying our own artifact is an option, but I don't think that's what we want to do. And I don't think we need Relic for Snapcaster, so we're mainly looking at removal spells. I think Gutshot probably has enough merit since it only costs us 2 life as opposed to Dismember. And then I'm just gonna cut a Sparring Construct and call it a day. I think Evolutionary Leap is probably fine. Our opponent's gonna be pointing a lot of removal spells at our creatures, and Welding Jar is gonna be great too. And this hand seems okay. It's a bit light on creatures, but I don't think we can mulligan this. No turn 1 play from the opponents. And Hardened Scales right on time. Could have also considered going Citadel into Mox Opal and try to play Scales next turn, but I don't want to get this mana leaked. And I guess I should have probably just played the Mox Opal last turn, but if they want to counter the Mox Opal, so be it. Tapped Fumarole, so your opponent with a pretty slow draw here. And Walking Ballista is not a bad pickup. So let's play Mox Opal. Play Citadel. And I think I'm just playing the Ravager here. If they have a Spell Snare, they have a Spell Snare. They have a Spell Snare. And next turn we can just play a pretty sizable Walking Ballista. Alright, opponent with quite a few creature lands here. Arcbound Worker's not bad. I guess our Mox Opal's not active, so playing Ballista for 2 would not work. So instead we'll play the Worker. Now Mox Opal is active, and then we'll play a Throne of Geth. And see if they have a Snapcaster Mage they want to use. Opponent is definitely considering the Snapcaster Mage here. Yep, that's fine. If Walking Ballista resolves, we're going to be in great shape here, as it can deal with all the opponent's 1 toughness stuff. And we could even consider blocking with the Worker, putting the counters on the Inkmoth. If the opponent is inclined to kill the Inkmoth, that's fine too. It's a pretty aggressive block. That's probably not necessary, but I feel like it's okay. Since their opponent's going to be pretty eager to kill our Inkmoth here, I guess I could stifle the Inkmoth activation, but then we for sure get Resolve Ballista. And is it Staticaster? Well, that's a good one. It's gonna kill the Inkmoth, and our Worker is just gonna trade with Snapcaster and not give us any benefits. Alright, so definitely a setback, but could have been worse. And a Delver. Alright, let's play a small Ballista. And we don't want to use Ballista on Delver, otherwise the Staticaster kills Ballista. But they did reveal a Lightning Bolt. Alright, so if they bolt the Ballista, then we kill the Aberration, so there's that too. Probably forced to take the damage either way, since we want to force them to use the Lightning Bolt on the Ballista. Another Hardened Scales is exciting. So let's play the Scales. Well, now we're in this kind of weird stalemate where if we activate Ballista, they bolt. But they can't bolt as long as we don't activate. So if we attack, they can block with Mutavault, force us to activate, they bolt, we kill Delver, that seems okay. Yep, they're gonna go for the Mutavault activation. That's fine, we're gonna let them block. Then we're gonna activate Ballista. They're gonna bolt, and we're gonna kill Delver. Alright, so we got rid of the Delver, so our opponent doesn't have a ton of pressure in play, and we just need to top deck any of our powerful artifacts with double Hardened Scales in play to win the game. And there we go. It's gonna get remanded, that's fine. We'll try again. And say go. As long as the Static Caster is around, it's going to be difficult to threaten anything with the Inkmoth Nexus. Bolt on the Ravager. Alright, so let's make a mana. And then sack the Opal, I think. And they're going to remand their own Bolt, fair enough. Untap, find Hangarback Walker, that's an exciting draw. So let's attack for 6. And their opponents already showed us 2 remands. So it feels safe to play this X equals 2. Also plays around Spell Snare better. Alright, resolves, and now we're in a very good spot. They're trying to bolt Hangarback, that's fine. So they can Static Caster it. Now we might as well sack to the Ravager. And if our opponent tries to Static Caster one of the Thopter tokens, we can just sack the one that's targeted so the other ones don't die. Yeah, Ravager is quite a nightmare for the damage-based removal spell deck. Opponent seems to be flooding out a bit. Another Ravager is a great draw. It's going to make it even more difficult for the opponent to get anywhere. Attack with everyone. And we'll see how they react here. Mutavault's gonna jump in front of the Ravager. And our opponent activates Static Caster on the Thopter. I think we can go for lethal now. So we'll sack the Thopter to the second Ravager, putting 3 counters on it. So now we've got a 6/6 Ravager. And now we can sack the Citadel. Make Ravager 9 powered, and then sack second Ravager to first Ravager, putting all the counters on the Thopter token. And that should do it. And of course a Static Caster no longer kills the Thopters because we got rid of the only target. And that does it. Awesome, managed to beat Blue-Red Wizards. Wanna thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed this gameplay. And as always, have a nice day. I also want to thank all my patrons for supporting the channel, and you can do so yourself as well over at patreon.com/LegenVD, where you get cool rewards for supporting the channel, as well as getting us closer to our goals, where with every goal reached, we will release an additional weekly series. So if you want to see more content, Patreon is the place to go.